Hey, what's up? This is Anthony Davis with Shapeshift Wellness, and today we're going to look at a classic yoga pose that you probably do in almost every yoga class you ever go to, Ardha Uttanasana, half lift, and we're gonna shapeshift that But hey, first make sure you like this video, subscribe to my channel, share this video with your friends, and stick around to the end because, I don't know, there's probably something. I'm probably going to say something interesting, and I'm not going to say it until the end. You don't know. I could say anything at any time. You don't know. It's probably going to be nothing. Okay, let's talk about the half lift. So here's the way I do it. This I pulled off of a guided class from my guided class library, which I'm going to make a shameless plug for in just a second. But first, I just want to give a couple good reasons for doing a half lift in this fashion as opposed to your typical fashion with your hands on the ground. The simplest and most compelling reason, other than all the biomechanics, which I'm going to discuss in a moment, is that hip hinging, using your hip joints to perform a movement and using your posterior chain to perform that movement is really important because your hips are designed for mobility. And if you can use them well and effectively, then you won't be using joints above and below that joint, that hip joint, that are better suited for other tasks. So your hip joint is designed for really strong kinds of mobility, and we should be able to use it to the fullest of its ability. So let's look at the biomechanics in just a moment. But first, did you know that I have a guided class library with a bunch of classes in it? There are a bunch of classes. You can go and you pay a little bit of money, and then you can take any of the classes you want, as much as you want. I like to do it as a subscription base because then you can just take the classes as much as you want, and there are a bunch of them. As you can see, I've got, I don't know, almost 40 different videos in there. Some of them are instructional, and most of them are guided movement or guided meditation. So if you haven't checked that out, the link is up there. I'll leave it in the description, but you should go there for guided things. Okay, now let's talk about biomechanics. That's why we're here, right? So the half lift, this is an old post, but it's a good one. And what you'll see here is that we've got your classical pose, and then we've got it shapeshifted. And in the shapeshifted version, well, you'll probably notice if you try this on for size, which I recommend, by the way, pause the video and try the normal version where you're trying to get your hands on the floor and then you crank your head to look up and you try to flatten your back, but that's impossible because nobody's really that flexible. And then try this instead. And try to, lift all the way up off the floor. Use the back muscles and the leg muscles. Don't make the floor your goal and see how this feels. Or maybe you try this in a second after I've explained how to do these poses. So let's compare them. So in the classical version, hands are on the floor. Head, generally speaking, is going to be looking kind of forward. So maybe cranking the neck a little bit there. Not necessarily the best strategy in my opinion. Forcing the torso to hang, to pull down this way. And what that is doing is pulling the spine along with it. And meanwhile, the hamstrings, which are on a maximal stretch, are pulling the sitting bones back in the opposite direction. So we're creating kind of a torque at the SI joint that for some people might be a little bit bothersome. It's not necessarily going to cause all the issues for all the people, but it just seems like a silly thing to push the hypermobility. Usually we lock out the knees here, and that's going to again force you into a really hypermobile position that is just not necessary. It's not even that this is like an evil or unsafe kind of pose. I just don't see the point. Why do we have to make everything so hard in yoga? Why does everything have to be about maximal flexibility? Why is that such an important goal in yoga? And if we can step back and we can reprioritize and we can realize the value of strength in yoga as well, then instead of making the floor the goal, we lift up. We really do lift up halfway or more. right? Because halfway would be about right there. So we can lift more than halfway. We can genuinely have a straight spine. I say straight, but really you would have the natural curves of your spine. You won't have that rounded back. Not that it's a bad thing, but the point is that we can lift up into a nice neutral spine, which means that we're really doing a hip hinging activity where the hip joint is the focal point of the movement. And that means that, well, in this picture, this person, their half lift is, let's say, so here to here, this angle, let's call that like 110-ish degrees. Well, maybe that's not your half lift. Maybe your half lift is, around here or here or, even here. That's fine. But we can lift up enough so that our back can maintain its neutral curves. What this allows us to do, again, there are other ways to do this, and there are other valid ways to do this. But what doing it this way allows us to do is to strengthen the posterior chain of muscles. So all of the erectors on the back, multifidi, and all of these really important spinal stabilizing muscles, we get to use them. We get to use the butt here and the hamstrings on the back. So we get to use this entire posterior chain and leg muscles as well, but I don't need to show you every single muscle that's involved. The point is we get to use the back side of the body and get really, really strong. And that is going to be important prehab in hopefully preventing injuries, or if we do get injured in the future, in mitigating the effects of those injuries. The other thing that I want to point out here is that in the classic Ardha Uttanasana, you're generally internally rotating the legs. You'll hear the cue, spin the inner thighs back. Well, in flexion of the hip, and I have videos on this to explain it, but in flexion of the hip, internal rotation will mimic and feet together. Internal rotation plus feet together during hip flexion is literally a test for impingement of the hip. It's not going to bother everybody, but if you're teaching a group class, why would you not do the opposite to create space in the hip joint? So you'll notice that here I have my feet nice and wide, so my feet are wide apart. And additionally, the knees are spinning out to the sides. Okay, so we're externally rotating. We're bending the knees a little bit and externally rotating them. And that creates room for the hip joint to be mobile. If you don't do that and you run out of space in the hip joint, then the only thing that can perform the action of kind of hinging forward is the lumbar spine. And that's where you create that rounding of the back. So these are some anatomical considerations, just interesting points in my opinion of why I think doing a half lift in a stronger, genuinely lifted position. And then also with the arms extended out, it's as though we've placed a weight far away from the body, which is going to mean that we're really trying to load into the low back. And that's a good thing. It means we're going to get strong. We don't use weights usually in yoga, and so if we can use the arms to create a mechanical disadvantage, that's a good thing. It means the exercise is harder. So reaching forward in this case makes the exercise harder. You could even take blocks and hold blocks, 1 or 2 blocks, especially cork blocks, in the hands to genuinely add a weight to this exercise. And I'll give you one more tip. And that is that you can perform repetitions where you start from standing. So you're up here with your arms reaching up, and then you oscillate back and forth. And I've shared this in other videos, but you start at the top and maybe exhale for 6 seconds as you hinge forward, and then inhale for 4 seconds as you stand up. Yeah. And that's going to give you a vinyasa type of thing, a one breath, one movement type of experience. And, we're always kind of looking, it seems like that, we're always kind of looking for those opportunities in yoga. So why not use an eccentric exercise, which is better for mobility, which is also going to strengthen your back, which is not forcing you into a hypermobile position, and which finally, hip hinging is generally an exercise that the leading biomechanics researchers in the world, such as Dr. Stu McGill, are huge proponents of teaching people how to hip hinge. Not that it's the only movement that's important, but it is a very valuable one. So I hope that that helps. Again, reminder, if you'd like guided classes, I do offer them in my guided class library. So go check that out. Again, the link will be in the description. Also, like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next video.